book. He said, no, it's my book. I'm like,
It's my
excuse
book.
me?
It's in my Bible. From my car, I went one by lunchtime.
All right.
I'm sorry, but it is.
All right.
Book of Ruth this morning. How's everybody doing?
Great. Wide awake.
Fantabulous.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Made that myself.
Sunday school an hour early.
Yeah, is everybody like figured out like what time zone they're in yet? No. This honestly, I love Sundays, but I hate this Sunday. Every year, this is my least favorite day of the. Actually, my second least favorite day of the year. My worst least favorite day of the year is the Monday that follows when daylight saving time ends, because that's the day that you get out of work and it's dark already.
Yeah, I hate that one. Yeah.
That's my worst. That's my absolute least favorite day.
I lost it in the early 70s. I haven't found it.
We won't comment on that one.
I didn't know him then.
I don't know what happened in the 70s, man. I was a little young.
Let's just round it up to a quarter.
The 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s.
I remember the
Keep
80s.
going, ready?
Lots of great music and very bad fashion choices.
Oh gosh, I can look back and go, oh Lord, I can't believe we were really messed up.
I mean, whoever thought the guys needed like short shorts and long socks with stripes on them should have been shot.
Nobody.
Should have been shot. Yeah, I did too. I was a kid. I didn't really have a lot of choices, but.
I wasn't a kid. I've been married for 10 years.
Sunday school.
Well, keep it in the bedroom. All right.
Wouldn't matter if each other were Baptist.
Doesn't matter. I think initial is okay.
Maybe that's like, I know, that period in your life is not good.
Now we had TJ and I had kind of an offside going here. We're going to bring the rest of you in, and it kind of ropes in the 70s and 80s in its own respect. Have you noticed that our culture is kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? A disaster. Really messed up. We were talking. If you look at our culture, you look at American society and really kind of American values, and you reach back pre-World War II. And so this is a stretch that we have to kind of make. One of the things that we don't typically appreciate is from about World War II on, bless you, American culture and values has been rapidly changing since about World War II going forward. There were a lot of things, some people point back to the 60s. Obviously, American culture and values changed pretty rapidly during the 60s, early 70s. And that continued on, up to today. I mean, you can look at what's going on today and see seeds of it going back several decades. But to see what really happened in the 60s, you can look back into World War II and things that started to happen there. You had women entering the workforce, leaving the home. It was a necessity, obviously, because most of the men were off in Europe fighting. So you have that. That changed the dynamic of the American family all by itself, because prior to that, women were at home, they were being moms, they were raising their kids, and that is a hardcore job that most moms don't get enough credit for.
Amen.
But when they shifted out of that role into the workforce, that changed the dynamic of the homes for that generation. World War II ends, soldiers come home, there's a little bit of an influx of wealth. I mean, the American industrial machine was really churning at that point, right at the end of the war. And so, a guy could go out, he could get a job, support his family on one income. Things didn't quite, though, revert back because women had already entered the workforce. Some of them gladly went home, and some of them gladly stayed. And this is not disparaging that. This is just, kind of articulating what happened. And so that trend then began to grow as more and more women, especially the girls who were daughters during that World War II era, come into the mid to late 50s, they saw mom go to work, they think that's a good idea. And they get into the late 50s, early 60s, and it becomes increasingly the norm that you have moms leaving homes, and that of course changes the family dynamic to the place now where in our day, it's not just a norm, it's a necessity, because most families require two incomes That industrial base that was churning at the end of World War II slowed down, almost shut down. We've exported most of our industry out to China or to Mexico or someplace else where it's cheaper. And you can't blame business for doing what business does, because the ultimate job of business is to earn profit, which means cutting losses. So that is what it is. But you have throughout this, between moms in the workforce, dads being very career oriented or needing to work long hours or multiple jobs to make ends meet, you have American culture changing quite a lot. To the place where I love my country, I'm not necessarily fond always of our cultural values anymore. And this is kind of the short version of it. There's a lot more we could say about what has happened. My father-in-law is a very traditional kind of guy. He told me before I got married a couple things. First, when I was very traditional myself, I asked him if I could have his permission to marry Kate. And his response was just priceless. He goes, I think you're crazy, don't you? God's honest truth, that's what he said. And, I really didn't get worried until Pap, Kate's grandfather, said the evening before our wedding, we're standing there at the hotel with them getting ready to head off to the rehearsal and all that. And he pulled me aside. He goes, we won't think anything less of you if you jump out now. Like, it's a sad late. I mean, Tux is in the trunk. This is.
Is that his way of saying we can't think any less of you?
Well, no. He likes me, and he's like, if you bail out now, we won't think. I'm like, what in the world am I getting myself into? What's that? Oh, yeah. I didn't get that.
The church could have used it, Chris.
Yeah.
My best man threw the keys at me.
What's that?
My best man
His
threw the
first
keys
one, his
at
first
me.
marriage, not
At you?
No,
Oh.
his first marriage, not mine. Ours.
Run, Forrest!
In retrospect.
He should have.
My
Um,
daughter said, good. Now you can take care of her.
That's the truth.
Well, that's all right. No. At my wedding, my two brothers told me they were taking their guns to the, we got married in our apartment. He said, yeah, we're taking guns to your wedding. I thought they were kidding. They did not. They had 357s. I'm like, what are you afraid of? Oh, yeah. It's like, if
You
did
are
it,
getting
they'd
married
been
today.
dead. They'd have been dead. I'm like, oh, great.
If you get cold feet, they'll be permanently cold. But no, the other thing he said to me was this, that he believes that if a household needs two incomes to support the household, that I needed to get two jobs.
Got it.
Which I have done. I don't disagree with him. With 6 kids, obviously, Kate has a full-time job just being mom. For us to have her work to go to daycare would actually cost us more than she could possibly earn to just do daycare for all the kids. So, it was it's really not a decision that we had to make. But when you look at our culture, though, and you look at all that has transpired, and this is kind of just the short version, and probably in your own minds, in your own lives, and in your own experiences, you could see other facets of things that have gone wrong. But as you look at our culture now, we find ourselves at a place value-wise where we kind of wish somebody would help. Where we kind of need it. I mean, life has very little value in our society. I mean, in there are pockets it still does. Obviously, I'm speaking in large generalized terms, but hard work doesn't have the cachet that it used to. Life doesn't have a lot of it. So there's a lot of things that we could talk about in our values. You think about most people's income to debt ratios upside down. And just everything that goes along, financial, economic, moral, philosophical, all of these things, they're kind of tied together. What's the one thing that we need? I'll take that as an answer, Jesus. We're very much in a place where we need kind of a redemption. We need somebody who will step in and redeem our culture. And that's one of the reasons that I'm fanatical about church, other than I just love it and I'm employed. But seriously, because I think that the change in value and in philosophy that we embrace and we kind of celebrate here together as we think about what Jesus is doing in our lives is something that would benefit our whole culture. I think my life is better because of Jesus, and I want that word to kind of get out. And as I look at your lives, I'm thinking, at least anecdotally, that your lives are better because of Jesus. I know, many of you to varying degrees, but I think that you're better off now than you were before. And so, yeah, and everybody's saying yes. And so this is kind of, what we want to share with the people around us. And really, this is the story of Ruth. As we look into Ruth, and we don't have time to go through the entire book today, though that's what we're assigned, which is exciting. It's only 4 chapters. It's a good read. Now, for history-wise, Ruth takes place during the period of the Judges, and that's why it is kind of situated where it is. You have Joshua, Judges, Ruth. These are fairly chronological in their sequence. The Judges, remember, is a period, the book of Judges covered a period of about 400 years, so it covers a pretty lengthy amount of time. Ruth is kind of nestled into that time period. And what we find is a time when there was famine going on in Israel. It happened even back then. And you get this central family to the story of Ruth, who moves off from the area of Bethlehem, moves from Bethlehem out to the nation of Moab. Anybody remember names? Okay, well, you get Naomi, you get Ruth, and Orpah, not Oprah, Orpah. Okay, how about some guys' names? Mahlon and Chilion, and, I forget the husband's name. It happens. No, Elimelech. Elimelech was dad. So Elimelech packs up the station wagon. They move to Moab. Now, was this something that God ever allowed or encouraged for the Jews to do? Things get bad, you leave. I mean, that's what we do in America today. You don't like where you live, pack up the fan and go. Which some of us have done more than others. But this is what Elimelech opted to do. And as they get over there in Moab, as they're there, he's there. His 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, they get married to Ruth and Orpah. They get married. Don't ask me who married who. I'd have to read it again. And so you get this going on, and then Elimelech dies, and then Mahlon dies, and then Chilion dies. And so you've got Mom, Naomi, and Ruth and Orpah, 3 widows living in a household together. I'm guessing this is a 0-income home. That's just the culture that was in Moab, just like in Israel. And suddenly Naomi decides, things haven't worked out so well here in Moab. God rest Elimelech's soul and all, but this just wasn't a good decision, I think. And so she decides she's going to go back to Bethlehem. That's where she's from. She figures, she's got family there. Something good could happen. So she gets up and she leaves. Orpah and Ruth decide they're going to go with her. And so they get to the border. There's the whole crossing thing going on. And Naomi's like, no, you girls are Moabites. You need to go back to your father's homes, remarry, have good Moabite children, have a good Moabite life. See ya. And so Orpah decides, okay, I'm going back to my dad's house and we'll find another husband. And Ruth makes this great declaration, no, I'm going with you. Where you go, I'm going to go. Your people are going to be my people. Your God's going to be my God. Where you live, I'm going to live. Where you die, I'm going to die. So let's not talk about it. I'm just going. And, just absolutely almost belligerent. And so Naomi and Ruth head back to Bethlehem. Bethlehem, things are better. The famine is over. There's, grain and there's harvest and all this thing. But Naomi and Ruth find themselves back in Bethlehem, still in need of a savior for all intents and purposes. They're still, unemployed. They're women living in a men's world. They're still without husbands or fathers or anybody to protect them, to care for them, to provide for them, all of these things that are typical in their culture. And so they're in need of a redeemer. Ruth then goes out to work. And so we find this she just goes out. And one of the principles that we find from Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy is that God said, when you harvest your field, he said, don't harvest in the corners and don't go back a second time. So pick it out, and once you make a first pass through, you're done. And the reason he said that was so that the poor of the nation could go in and they could follow the harvesters and they could harvest what remained, and they would at least be able to eat. And this is something that God set up, kind of his own welfare system, if you will, but a method of providing for the people who would need it. And so Ruth goes out, and she's going out to glean, is what it's called, gleaning. And she's just following after the harvesters are gone through and goes to find whatever she can. And so she's out there working. And Boaz, she just happens to be in Boaz's field. And Boaz looks at her and says, wow, that one's hot. That's in the Hebrew, but that's basically what transpired. And he's like, she's hot and she's industrious. She's out there and she's working hard. And he's doing background checks and she's out there harvesting, right? So, sorry, did that surprise you?
Mucho caliente.
Eat mama. Anyway, so Boaz is checking up on Ruth as the girls up front are blushing.
Oh, I want to stay here.
Oh, it's amazing what comes out of my mouth. I don't think about it ahead of time because I like to be surprised too. And so Boaz is checking up on Ruth as Ruth is out gleaning, and he tells the guys, he tells his workers that are there, make sure that you keep an eye on her, protect her. If she looks like she needs a drink, give her water. Take care of her. When it's lunchtime, feed her, which they didn't have to do. And then at the end of the day, he actually gave her more grain too, just because he liked it. So. And so this is a story that begins to go. So Ruth is very much a love story. I'm telling this from a guy's perspective, clearly. You can read it yourself, ladies, and get the mush perspective if you want. Because there is some of that. And so Ruth is going through, and she comes home with all this grain, and Naomi says, wow, you did really well. I think the person whose field you were in today likes you. You should stay there. Go back to there tomorrow. Don't go anywhere else. And as the story progresses, what we find is that Boaz is actually kin to Elimelech. This is where you go, dun, dun, dun. He's actually a relative. And so when, this becomes known to Naomi, now she does this really weird thing. And I don't know that I can help you understand why. I'll give you my theory. But she goes to Ruth, and she goes, what I want you to do is kind of hang out, and when the men are done feasting for the night and they've all gone to sleep, sneak into the barn where Boaz is sleeping. Now, why they're sleeping in the barn, I don't know, but they were. And sneak into Boaz to where Boaz is sleeping in the barn and uncover his feet. Okay, she said, and then just wait, and he'll tell you what to do. So she does. This is weird. And so she does. And this wakes Boaz up. And the only thing I can picture is, you get cold feet and it wakes you up at night. I have no idea. I don't understand why. This is what Naomi told Ruth to do. This is Ruth's like, whatever, Mom. And so she does. And so Boaz realizes in this moment that Ruth has kind of picked him. So, if you want a precedent for, ladies asking their guys, this is it. This is Ruth going, I want you. And Boaz is actually impressed more with Ruth because he says, look, and he goes through it, he said, you could have picked anybody you wanted and you chose me. Now, Boaz was not the youngest horse in the stable. He was wealthy, and that compensates. But he was like this, he appreciated being chosen, is kind of what it boils down to. And so he says, as before the sun comes up, I'll send you home, and I'll take care of the arrangements. And so Boaz then goes to the city gate the next morning. That's where all the business was done. It's kind of the courtroom of the day. And he goes to the city gate and he says, guys, I want to get married. Basically is what he said. But what he wants to do is actually play the part of the kinsman redeemer. There is a principle coming out of, again, the Old Testament law of a person who was a relative who would be the part of a kinsman redeemer. Now, there were several aspects to this particular role. It was a very serious role. First of all, you would actually be purchasing the land belonging to the deceased, in this case Elimelech. In Israel, land wasn't saleable. on a permanent basis, and so that land still belonged to Elimelech, nobody working it, it's just there, but by being the kinsman redeemer, he's going to buy the land. He's also going to marry the widow. I think this is the motivation, in marrying Ruth, now the wife of the deceased, raising up children to Mahlon and Chilion, to Elimelech essentially, so that line continues. There's also part of the kinsman redeemer that you are the avenger of death. This is not the important part that he was playing here, but were somebody to be murdered, as the kinsman redeemer, you would actually be judge, jury, and executioner, and that was part of the role as well. So there was a lot that goes into this role, and according to the law, it had to be the nearest male relative to the deceased was the person who was supposed to play this role, and then it kind of filtered down as it went. And so he's there, and there was one other guy who was actually of nearer kin than he was to Elimelech. And so they have this meeting there at the city gates, and he says, look, Naomi's back, and somebody needs to be the kinsman redeemer. And so the guy's like, oh, I'll buy her field. And then Boaz is like, but there's a girl involved. And he's like, I'm already married. That's not going to work for me. And so they decide together that, the nearest kin who's got the right and the responsibility passes on it so that Boaz can play that role of kinsman redeemer. They trade shoes. I don't get that part, but when you read it, just understand they trade sandals. That's kind of ew. But whatever, I guess walking around with mismatched sandals says we made a deal. That's just how it happened. I can't tell you all the cultural nuances. Yeah, it's signed in blood, sweat, and funk. I don't know. Foot, funk, and sweat.
Really?
See, mine are covered. Now, I do wear flip-flops all summer long, but that's, anyway. I'm not a foot thing. So, but this is what they do. And so Boaz plays then this part of the kinsman redeemer. He buys the field, and so Naomi is taken care of financially because the field has been purchased, stays within the family, so it's in accordance with the law. Ruth gets married to Boaz, and they have a son. This is kind of good. And so you have this picture of redemption taking its course in the life of Naomi and Ruth. What's cool about this, then, is as you read the genealogy of Jesus, guess who pops into the genealogy? Ruth. A woman. A Moabite woman, no less. She's not even Jewish. One of only 4 women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus. And she would have been the grandmother of King David. Pretty cool. But what you have in Ruth, and I just kind of summarize it just to bring it all together, because it's a very cool story. It's a lot of fun. But what you have in Ruth is the story of a redemption. You see in chapter 1 that there is a need for a redeemer, and things look bad for Ruth and Naomi. In chapters 2 and 3, you see this plan of redemption unfolding, and you get into chapter 4, and you see this redemption take place. And God take what was probably a very difficult and painful episode in a person's life and actually redeeming it to such a great place that Ruth gets inserted into the genealogy of Jesus. And so what we see in this is just a story of redemption. God works the same way in our lives. In our culture as a whole, as we talked about, we see a need for redemption. In each of our lives, there is need for a redeemer. Even as children of God, as followers of Jesus, there are crises, there are times of difficulty, there are times of dilemma where we just sit back and we say, God, I have a need. I need you to step in. I need you to be God. I need you to redeem me from this, buy me out of this. And the good news is, and we see it illustrated in Ruth 2 and 3, is that God has a plan for our redemption. Not just our eternal redemption, but our physical redemption. The plans the things that go on in our life, He has a plan to redeem those. And eventually, at a time of where it all kind of comes together, He'll actually redeem us. And that's why you can get over into the New Testament, and we find all things work together for the good of those who love God, of those who are called according to His purpose. Paul didn't say that all things are good, because he'd have been a liar, plain and simple, because all things are not good, and I would never stand here and tell you that. But what I can tell you is that all things work together for good, because God is a redeemer. And that's what we find illustrated so very picturesquely in the book of Ruth. Questions, comments? Going once, twice, threes? All right, let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for this great story in Ruth. We thank you that you love us and you are our Redeemer. Father, not just eternally, although we're grateful for that, but even in this life and in this time, the difficulties and dilemmas that we face, you stand ready and willing and in process of redeeming, so that we can ultimately look at our lives and say it all works together for good and for your glory, even when there are difficult times. Thank you for being our Redeemer. Would you help us to trust in your redemption and to entrust ourselves to your care as Ruth did to Boaz? Help us to love you and to serve you and to trust you in that way, we pray in Jesus' good name. Amen. All right.